My guest today is Maria Cornelius, and I'm excited to talk to you because you're a friend. I've known you for a long time, but there's a lot about you I did not know. And so we're going to tell your story today, so thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
For those who don't know her, and you should, if you're of all, if you love Pat Summitt, then you should know this name because you wrote a book, and really the official book for Pat Summitt's life. Tell us about how did you even get connected with Pat Summitt to get authorized to write your book?
That is a long story and a funny story, so I will tell it as quickly as I can. In 1998, I was working at the News Sentinel. I was the night editor. I was not in sports. I was news side. Pat Summitt, we got tipped off, sports department did, that she was going to be on the cover of Sports Illustrated, and that would be the first coach of a women's team to ever be on the cover. Well, sports did not have anybody to write the story. And the photo's about to come in, and there's this big gap on page one. I walk in at 4 o'clock to be the night news editor. They took one look at me and said, "You need to find Pat Summitt. We need to talk to Pat Summitt." So, being a former police reporter, I just started calling her office. We didn't go through official channels. We just went right to the person we needed. And I persisted and called her secretary over and over again and said, told my name, I'm at the News Sentinel, I have to talk to Pat, didn't say why.
Okay.
I later learned Pat's schedule is color-coded to the second. And clearly my name was not on it that day to reach Pat Summitt. So the secretary got so alarmed, she went to find Pat and pulled her out of some very important meeting to tell her this reporter won't stop calling me. So my phone rings at the newsroom and it's Pat Summitt.
Oh, wow.
And I answer it and she goes, "Is this Miss Cornelius?" I mean, you could hear the seething through the phone line. And this was the old days, no cell phones, you're on a wired phone. And I had seen the cover, that famous stare, and I'm like, boy, that cover pegged her. I had never met her to this point. I had been to games, but I went as a fan, not a writer, because I was news side. And I told her why I was calling. It gets very quiet. I'm like, did she hang up? And this very soft voice came back and said, "Can you repeat that?" She did not know.
She didn't know?
She didn't know. So I said, yes, and I explained again. I said, "We have a front page story. I need to talk to you. This is a major, accolade in your career." And then straight Pat Summitt. She credited everybody but herself. She credited Joan Cronin, the university, everyone but herself. And then, of course, we got the story. I remember the night editor just kept holding up the page, the proof of the entire front page and this blank column with nothing there. She goes, "I need a story." I said, "I'm going as fast as I can." After that, we became friends. Friends as me as a journalist, her as a coach. But it's a funny story to tell because the first time I ever met her, it absolutely infuriated her.
Oh my God, I could see you want to just hang up, never mind, because of the way she said your name. So then, let me ask you this, how did you come up with the title of the book? Because the final season, The Perseverance of Pat Summitt, it's a very fitting title if you look at her life.
Yes, and the final season seemed like a gimme. I mean, that's what it was. But having witnessed that season, having been there, away games, home games, the final game in Des Moines, Iowa, the whole season, that team persevered. Pat Summitt persevered. That was a brutal season for those players because they're watching this iconic woman deteriorate right in front of them. And for those players to even get to an Elite Eight, to get through that season, to win the SEC tournament championship, just the perseverance of not just Pat, the players, Pat to put herself forward. You get diagnosed with early onset dementia. What is your natural instinct? To retreat from the public eye. She starts a foundation. She continues to coach. She puts herself out there. And it just seemed to encapsulate what that entire season was. And writing that book, the book was scheduled to come out September of 2026, and then it was already in production, indexing getting started, everything going to get it ready for print proofs when we got word that Pat Summitt wasn't well. So I called UT Press and said, we need to pull that manuscript back. And I spent an entire weekend in July, because she died, of course, June 14th, June 28th. She was born on June 14th. She died on June 28th, 2016. And I spent the next weekend in July putting that entire book in past tense. That was a brutal writing exercise. And then we got it somehow to the printer, and I believe the first book signing was September 30th, and the books arrived that morning, literally pulling them off the truck to get the hardback out. So that I will never, as a journalist, you document, you take photos, you step back. And I remember it was then called Wells Fargo Arena in Des Moines, Iowa, after they lost to Baylor, which go on undefeated and win the national championship. And there was a very long hallway after you left the court. And the locker rooms were that way, and the media would go that way. And I remember just stopping and leaning against a wall and watching Pat walk. Tyler Summitt, her son, had his arm around her, and the staff, and was taking that long walk. And I thought, just stop, don't take photos, just stop for a minute. You were watching a legendary coach walk into the locker room as a head coach for the last time. I mean, we all knew where it was going to go. And perseverance just kept standing out to me that entire season, how everyone connected to that program just persevered.
I remember the morning when we got word that she had passed away. And I wasn't connected to her like you, to have that access to be able to talk to her and get her story and become, like you said, that friendly professional relationship. But I remember it was a collective devastation for everybody in the newsroom. What was it like for you when you found out, when you finally got word?
Oddly enough, I woke up, like straight up, at 5:15 a.m. I later learned, my clock was always set 10 minutes ahead to keep me on time and get me to work on time. I later learned she passed at 5:05. I did not know that. I woke up and just like, okay, something feels different. And then as I'm getting up, preparing to go to work, the news starts to break. I had to immediately go to my regular job at Mock's Car and somehow try to focus on that and process what was going on. And then, obviously there were some interviews I was doing because people wanted to, talk to people who had covered her. So you go into that work mode. You go into that, these are things that need to get done. The same thing I did when the diagnosis was made public. You can't break down. You've got work to do. You've got to do you do it. I mean, as a journalist, you see horrible things.
You put it in the box. You do.
Yes, and you go in that space and you work. But I didn't really break down until and I never actually cried, which it's not something I do a lot. But I never really cried. But the night I had to put that book in past tense, I remember when I did it all in one sitting. I remember I just sat in the dark. It just felt like just a crushing weight of sorrow that this woman had left the earth and had left with such a horrible disease.
What did you learn from writing that book, or how did it change your life?
Ironically, while I was writing it, my own mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And the book is dedicated to her. She just passed away in April of 2024. But I was able, while she was still somewhat lucid, I was able to put the book in her hands and show her that it was dedicated to her. Being around Pat, it changes you fundamentally as a human being. I am just so lucky that somehow the universe lined up to where our paths would cross, even if I did make her mad. Now, I was a former police reporter, so I was used to people being angry about stories you wrote. So you understand.
Oh, yes.
So when she's on the phone mad, I'm just like, yeah, whatever. I wasn't intimidated at all. I later found out that she made some reporters cry sometimes because she was so unhappy with something. But Pat enjoyed the media. She liked the back and forth. you could engage with Pat. She opened up all her practices. She would come over while the team was shooting free throws and just chat, with me off the record, talking about her teams or what was going on. This is the kind of exchange I ended up being able to have with her. She walked over one time complaining about her team. They weren't doing well. She was mad. They don't do this and they don't do that. She was just going off on her team. And I looked at her and said, Pat, this sounds bad. She goes, it is bad. I said, Pat, who recruited these players? Oh, that look on her face, that look Pat gets, those eyes flash, and then that slight curl of her lip with a grin. She looked at me like, okay, I got your point. She enjoyed that back and forth, and coming out of a newsroom.
I love that.
Coming out of a newsroom, you know how raucous a newsroom can get. You got to be able to hold your own.
Yes.
So it was a fun relationship. I often told people, if you can't cover Pat Summitt's program, just get out of the industry. She opens up practice. She does one-on-one interviews. She gives you her cell phone. If you cannot cover her beat, then you need to find a different job because the access is incredible. She would occasionally just invite Dan Flesser and I in to come watch a scouting report. She goes, you can't report it, obviously, but I want you to see what it is we're trying to do because you'll write better stories. I learned more about basketball in 10 minutes in a scouting report with Pat Summitt than I had my entire life, and I played basketball.
Now, since you weren't a sports reporter when you got that big break, were you always interested in the Lady Vols?
Yes.
Or did you have to learn?
No, I was.
Okay.
They looked at me because knowing I was a huge sports fan.
Okay.
And they said, okay, you cover this. I'd been going to games. And then that sort of became a niche beat as we went online. I would go to Final Fours and do the fan side of the story. And then in 2004, I ended up leaving newspapers and starting to write full-time about the Lady Vols. And then that led me to where I ended up. And I still freelance for them. I'm no longer full-time, but I still freelance for 247 Sports and Knox TN Today here locally. So I've kept my feet in that pool because sports writing is my passion. It's what I love to do.
So let's talk about leaving news, because this part of your personal story, I think, can resonate with a lot of folks. You left news not because you didn't like it, but you did it for partly mental health.
Yes, and physical health. I was at a breakdown at that point in my life. I had stomach issues where my doctor said you can lower the stress or you can be dead by 50. He said, I have cancer patients in their 80s and your stomach looks worse than theirs does. That was one of the last scans we looked at after a scope, and the odd thing is a year later after I had gotten everything under control, it was perfectly clean, beautiful looking. I said, wow, yeah, stress is the great equalizer of everything. My childhood was interesting. It helps inform everyone. In 1978, was removed from my home due to sexual abuse that had lasted for 3 years. I was living in Memphis at the time. I was temporarily a foster child of the state of Tennessee. I do no longer have any contact with them, but that foster family was tremendous. I was also a very driven child, and this is kind of the story that wraps up the mindset of me as a child to get things done. My aunt and uncle wanted to come get me that day, and the caseworkers told them, well, she wants to finish school. I needed to finish 10th grade. I was in a very elite private school in Memphis. The school at that time was not happy that the caseworkers were even there at the school. The headmaster actually said to me, I don't agree with this, but by law I have to let them in. So, but remember, this was 1978. The woman, I confided in a friend because I was suicidal, and that friend told the Latin teacher, and the Latin teacher told the police, and that Latin teacher was later fired from that school for bringing the police in. But at this point,
But for saving you.
yes, and I went to school in Memphis. I later went back and went out to lunch with her and some of my other friends, and she was doing well then. She had moved on in her life, and I said, I want you to know, you saved my life. And of course, she's in tears, and I'm in tears, and she says that everything was worth it. I said, I would not be here if not for you. I remember we lived in a high-rise building. My mother was not there at the time, so my mother was not involved in this, which is a whole other long story. Obviously, she was back where we used to live trying to sell the house, and we had already relocated there. And I went to the roof. I also had a little tiny sister in a stroller.
This is why you were a teen.
Yes, I would have been 14 at this time. 14, 15, yes, 14, 15. And we lived across from the Memphis Zoo. And you could go up to the roof and just like crawl over and sit on the ledge. And I was at such a point of despair that I was ready to jump. And I was imagining where I'd land and who would find me. And I looked back at that little baby in the stroller, and I couldn't do it. I broke down on that roof, but I couldn't do it. I couldn't let that baby witness such a thing. So I went back to where we were living, told my friend where I was, what was happening. She told that teacher, and then everything moved very quickly in terms of going to court. So my mother surrendered custody. I went to live with my aunt and uncle for 2 years, bless them. I mean, a beautiful, wonderful family. My aunt has now passed away a few years later, which was devastating. And then started out on my journey as an adult. I think I went to college when I was 17, and I did not live at home again after that. I just found jobs and apartments and work and got my way through, and was actually a double major in biology and chemistry. Was only like 4 classes short. Thought I wanted to be a doctor. That was not my passion. I wanted to write for a newspaper, so I changed my major and graduated and got a job as an internship, as an intern with the News Sentinel, and it took off from there. Because of all those different decisions in my life, I tell myself you somehow collided with Pat Summitt. And that, besides my own mother, who we repaired our relationship as I got older, and we are actually in my 20s, and besides my own mother and grandmother and aunt, Pat Summitt would have had the most profound impact and influence on my life. I will add, with my mother, I got something that most people don't get in my position. And before I get to that part, I'll go back to, as I'm hitting like 38, 39, I am breaking down again. If you don't deal with trauma, because how I dealt with trauma, like if she wants to finish school, just focus on something else. Focus on and in your 20s, you're just trying to survive. You're trying to go to school and get jobs and start your career, and then I come in and get into a beat like the police beat and court beat. So
Which is hard. People do not understand the things you see that don't necessarily make it to the public. It's a lot to take in.
And so you compartmentalize and you put up walls. I mean, yes, you've seen it. I mean, you were on the scene of some of the worst times of people's life. Yes. There are still places in Knoxville I drive by and see what I saw when I was there on the scene. So all of these things keep you from dealing with things you just really don't want to deal with. But then I'm hitting my late 30s and it's all bubbling up again. Once again, it was a coworker that said, I am so worried about you. Losing tremendous weight. I mean, I was like 20 pounds lighter than I am now. Couldn't eat. Was suicidal again. And this time, my beloved 15-year-old cat named Fido that I had rescued in Memphis, when I was laying on the floor in my room thinking that, it's just time to stop this kind of pain, that cat came up and started rubbing on me and just curling up with me. And I'm like, she brought me back from that. I went to seek help immediately. The therapist at the time listened to the story. She goes, what keeps you going? I said, my cat. She goes, how old is your cat? I said, 15. She panicked a little bit at that because that's old for a cat.
Yes, that is.
And she took me out of work that day. And I went on short-term disability and into intensive therapy and worked through so many things that you just bury because you can't deal with it. And getting back to what I got from my mother that so many victims do not get, she, 1, remained trying to be a mother. 2, and in my 20s, she came to visit me here. And we were talking, and she goes, there's something I have to tell you. And she broke down sobbing, crying, apologizing, saying, I did not protect you. I am so sorry. You could have made my life miserable, but you chose to open your heart and still love me. Most people don't get that. And looking back now as an adult, I mean, she was a victim. This was a very violent household. She was a victim. She had mental health issues. And women like that tend to be targeted by predators. Now, this person has no blood relationship to me, but it was someone very close to the family. And I reached the point where it was hard to leave my siblings. I'm still very close with my younger sister. I just went to see her, obviously, in April in D.C. when our mother died. We still talk a lot. But I was able to get that closure you need from the adult who was there at the time saying, this should have never happened. I am so sorry. And I mean sobbing, crying. So we became very, very close. And I know a lot of survivors don't get that kind of apology. And that was a tremendous way for us to repair our relationship and be close as adults.
How are you able to share this? Or why share this? A lot of people carry trauma and they carry, life events and they hold them close. They don't share them with the public. Why are you so open to sharing this portion of your life?
When you asked me to do this, I thought, wow, that's awesome. I mean, I've watched Voices of the Valley. I'm like, wonder why she's asking me. And, then I said, all right, people know what I do. Because I've been on TV, I've written a book, they know I cover the Lady Vols. I've worked for 11 years now at Mox Car Marketing Communication. We have a lot of client work. I overlap with a lot of people. I said, a lot of people know what I do. Very few people know who I am. So if you're going to agree to this interview, tell people who you are. Open up. As I think it was either Rita Mae Brown or Mary Carr, one's a poet, one's one of the best writers the South has ever produced, said writing is opening up a vein. And I thought this interview can also be opening up a vein. Just let it out. And speaking of poetry, Nikki Giovanni, what a loss for Knoxville. Libraries also saved my life. My mother made sure I had a library card everywhere I was growing up. I lived in libraries.
I feel like everybody who is successful had that childhood. I really do. I grew up in library. In Miami. I know what you mean. It just shapes your opinion. It shapes your voice. Looking back on your life, who would you say stands out as the person that kept you going?
Wow, that's a great question. I mean, it's multiple people. I've been fortunate to overlap at times in my life with people who have been so good. My aunt was a huge one. My original first name was Michelle. It was changed later in various relationships that my mother was in, and then when I was 17, I paid to get back my grandparents' name. But anyway, I was born a Michelle, and that my middle name is now Michelle, so I kind of got it back.
Okay.
But I was originally Michelle Elizabeth. That was my original name, and she called me Shellbug. My aunt was a surrogate mother my entire life. Her name was Lou Ann Morris, and she died very unexpectedly from colon cancer at 53 in 1988, and I had just started at the News Sentinel. That's another one where I went into, a friend of mine who was living with me at the time said, you let out the oddest noise I've ever heard when you got that phone call and just curled up. I said, I don't even remember that. I went to work the next week. I went to the funeral. I went to work the next day, then went to the funeral, came back, and one of the editors said, I'm very sorry. And I looked up from my desk. I said, about what? I was in a complete state of denial about losing her. She was a rock for me throughout my life. My grandmother also, Maria Cornelius, she was a wonderful grandmother. She died in 1998, and shortly after I had just been, she died, I went to that funeral, and then I went to Queens, New York to interview Shamika Holtzclaw and her grandmother to do a feature story on them, and I thought how apropos, because Shamika's grandmother was her rock. So those were my two rocks as a young child. My mother many times was, many times could not be. She was in the throes of her own mental health struggles. And then getting into newspapers is perfect if you want to avoid everything that you don't want to deal with because you're so busy and you're dealing with so much and you meet so many people. But for me, reading, writing has always been a rock for me. I have to write. It is something I do all the time.
Okay, so explain for those who are not into writing, because I hear this a lot with writers about that passion of writing. Walk us through what it does for you to put pen to paper. I guess now we put fingers to keyboards. But why? What is it about it? Why is it cathartic for you?
I get so immersed in it. When I'm like a day off and I just want to do some writing I can lose total track of the time. I'll be like, oh, it's 4 o'clock. I haven't eaten today. I should get up and eat. And I still take handwritten notes. I believe you retain more. I use a keyboard, of course. I mean, I first started on typewriters. I use a keyboard, of course, and laptops, but I still take handwritten notes and outlines because I think it helps you organize. But for some people, maybe it's singing, maybe it's shopping, maybe it's walking. For me, it's writing. I just go into a place that I feel so fulfilled when I'm writing. I mean, I still write for just myself, just random things, and so it is. And I credit my mother to that because she was a writer. I grew up to the sounds of a typewriter clacking, and she did not save what she wrote, and she would not let us have it. Before her mind went, she got rid of everything she wrote, and that breaks my heart. Because she had I remember boxes of manuscripts and things she had written. So a lot of that, I think she instilled that in me with literally hearing a typewriter as a soundtrack of my life, and her making sure everywhere we lived I could get to a library.
So I know you from the community. Obviously we were on the ETSB, East Tennessee Society of Professional Journalists together, where you are Madam President. You are on a lot of boards. You are in this community. What does it do for you to contribute to all the different things? Because Women's Basketball Hall of Fame, East Tennessee Society of Professional Journalists, you name it, you're kind of in there. What keeps your hand in all the different pots?
And making strides against breast cancer. I've been a volunteer on that committee for 10 years. That was primarily like, all right, you have breast cancer. I have now considered a survivor. It has been over 10 years. But give back. I think there's a social contract we should all have where we give back, particularly those of us who have been so blessed. So I joined that committee, helped bring the pink game back to Smokies baseball. And I cannot wait for Smokies baseball to be back in Knoxville. I went to Sevier County all 25 years. I cannot wait for them to come home. So I'm very excited about that. Women's Basketball Hall of Fame. I filled the city seat on that board. I mean, that's right in my wheelhouse, yes. Promoting women's basketball. ETSBJ, as you said the whole name, I'll shorten it. As you know, you get roped into one of these positions, you can never get out. It's like you're trapped. So I've been president now for several years. In fact, we're planning our holiday party and different events in the spring. And so I think there's an obligation to help, to give back. I am not a particularly religious person at all, so I don't want to co-opt anyone's religion. It's not for lack of trying. Various families where I was living with had me in every church in the world. I was confirmed in a Catholic church. I was saved in a Baptist church. I've often said I'm going straight to hell for those two together. I was in Presbyterian church, Moravian churches. Those people were very nice. The Moravians, my grandparents were Moravian because their families from Old Salem. But there is an expression that I believe is religious in origin that says we're all just walking each other home. I have tried to live that while I'm on this earth because we don't know what's on the other side. At least I don't know what's on the other side. And there's only one way to find out. So while you're here, do as much good as you can while you're here. And if you are blessed as I am, because despite some of the things we have talked about, I am blessed. I am okay. I am a breast cancer survivor. I am a trauma survivor. I am a published author, which is all probably I ever wanted to be as a kid. I have crossed paths with people who have poured into me. And I tell people, you have to pour back. I took someone out to lunch the other day wanting to break into PR. She wanted to buy lunch. I said, absolutely not. I said, here's the rule. 10 years from now, you're talking to somebody that wants to break into PR.
That's right.
You pick up their lunch. That's all I ask.
That's right.
So that's sort of my life philosophy. We're all just walking each other home.
Okay, so we can't end this without talking about your exciting news with the final season.
Yes.
Give me the big news about the book.
In 2026, it's hard to believe, but it will have been 10 years since the book was published and since, of course, Pat Summitt passed away. Mm-hmm. University of Tennessee Press approached me recently and said, we want to do a 10th anniversary edition of the book. Would you be willing to do that? And I said, absolutely. I have so many stories now that I have accumulated after it was published. So what we're going to do is keep the manuscript in place of the book, but intersperse it completely with new content. And it will be a hardback, and it will be out either late May or early June around the time of Pat Summitt's birthday and her death and the 10th year anniversary of the book. So it will be something, the production cycle, I have to get that done by May, so I need to get busy. I need to get going.
I think you'll be very busy over the next few months.
And I tell people it keeps me out of trouble. I have no time to get in trouble because I am always working. So it will be back out, and once again, my life crossing paths with Pat Summitt's life had a profound impact.
Maria Cornelius, I am so in awe of your resilience. Thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you.
And I appreciate you.
You're welcome.